Welcome to Gray Matters. Over on our podcast, Fixate Today, Gone Tomorrow, we are doing a deep dive looking into the tragic death of Mica Francis. While watching a video from Agatha May Detective Agency, I was reminded of the story of Elizabeth Packard. Agatha May was discussing another woman from Solid Rock Church who has come forward and alleges that her husband and the church used threats of being committed to a mental hospital to attempt to get her to attend the church with her husband and to fall in line with his and the church's beliefs after she refused to go. We know that John Paul Miller had his estranged wife, Mica Francis, involuntarily hospitalized multiple times. Each time, she was deemed mentally well and released. There is a long history in the United States of people using institutionalization to control others. This misuse of the mental health system has been outlined in Mica's list as something that should be legally considered coercive control and therefore should be illegal. Betsy Ware was born in 1816 in Massachusetts to parents Lucy and Samuel Ware. Betsy later changed her name to Elizabeth as an adult. Her father Samuel was a strict Calvinist minister. The family was upper middle class, but also inherited some wealth, which allowed the Wares to get all of their children, including the girls, a good education. Elizabeth went to Amherst Female Seminary, where she studied algebra, philosophy, and French. At the age of 19, she was diagnosed with brain fever caused by extreme emotional upset. Actually, it was most likely headaches and some slight depression, but honestly, who knows? Treatment included opium, magnesium sulfate, bloodletting, and induced vomiting. Her brain fever was apparently caused by, quote, too much mental effort into her teaching job and her corset being laced too tightly. No, really. After 6 weeks, Elizabeth was deemed, quote, free of insanity and released. Elizabeth married Theophilus Packard on May 21, 1839. She was 23 and he was 37 and had known her since she was a child. Between 1842 and 1859, they had 6 children together. Theophilus was a Calvinist minister who was said to loudly share his beliefs, but not so interested in hearing the beliefs of others. He was cold and controlling, and he believed that he was the master of both his wife and his home. In 1857, the family moved to Illinois, and by this time, Elizabeth had learned that it was best for herself and her children to bite her tongue when her husband proclaimed his Calvinist beliefs. This changed when Elizabeth overheard Theophilus tell the children that they were going to hell no matter what they did. She spoke to the children about other religions and beliefs to assure them that they were loved and safe. At this time, she was still outwardly identifying as a Calvinist, but was interested in exploring other ideas. The marriage grew rocky when Elizabeth started expressing her thoughts, opinions, and even doubts about Calvinism. Theophilus had her removed from church and put her into Bible class, where his brother-in-law was in charge. They declared that there was no room for interpretation in the Bible outside of what they were teaching. Elizabeth started questioning these teachings, which led to people skipping church to join the Bible class. Elizabeth, at the same time, was expressing her opinions about political matters. She supported the 1859 raid on Harper's Ferry by abolitionist John Brown. This was shocking to her husband and to their neighbors, and Theophilus demanded Elizabeth stop going to the Bible class and stop talking religion to the children. When she refused, Theophilus decided Elizabeth must be insane. Because she had been involuntarily committed 20 years earlier by her father, Elizabeth decided she needed to speak to an attorney about her concern that her husband would try to commit her now. The attorney assured her that she can't be admitted to an insane asylum against her will without a public hearing or trial. However, the attorney didn't know about a loophole in this law that allowed a husband or a father to have his wife or daughter committed without a hearing or a trial, as long as the asylum superintendent and at least one doctor signed off. In 1860, Theophilus decided that Elizabeth was, quote, slightly insane due to, quote, excessive application of body and mind. She, of course, disagreed, but disagreeing with her husband was a symptom of her insanity, so she must be insane. Theophilus' sister and some family friends, one by one, began popping by the house and offering to take the three younger children under the guise of giving Elizabeth time to rest and recover. At the same time, Theophilus was trying to convince Elizabeth to just go with him to check out the Illinois State Asylum and Hospital for the insane in Jacksonville. She, of course, refused to go willingly. One day, Theophilus gave a sermon that upset Elizabeth. She stood up and announced that she was leaving and going to start attending the Methodist church across the street. Theophilus told her that she needed to leave their home or he'd commit her. Because of her visit with the attorney, she believed he couldn't commit her involuntarily, and she refused to leave her home without her children. One afternoon in June 1860, a sewing machine salesman knocked at the Packard's front door. Elizabeth invited him in and had a conversation. He asked about her life, and she opened up. She spoke about her struggles with her husband's strong religious beliefs and her disdain for how he spoke about her to the community. This man was not a sewing machine salesman. He was Dr. J.W. Brown. Barged into her bedroom. Elizabeth was naked and desperately tried to get dressed. She locked her door and grabbed some clothes. When the men realized that the door was locked, Theophilus took an axe to her window to get her into the bedroom as she tried to cover herself. The doctors took her pulse and declared her insane. Beth had a room to herself, and she managed to be as comfortable as possible. Later, Elizabeth said that Dr. McFarland had, quote, sexual designs on her. The suggestion is he began harassing her. When she refused his advances, she was moved to the part of the hospital that held the very ill and violent patients. She and other patients were physically and verbally harassed by the staff regularly. She met many other women who had been locked up for being, quote, insane. Insanity was going through menopause, reading too many novels, yawning, and of course, voicing differing opinions from their husbands, just to name a few. The hospital knew they had patients who were sane, but they made more money with more people being committed. Elizabeth started writing what she was experiencing during her confinement, including women being regularly placed in straitjackets while the men weren't. Before she was committed, Theophilus told Elizabeth that she'd be released if she denied her own beliefs and agreed with him on everything. She refused and eventually spent 3 years in the hospital. He told his father and the hospital trustees that he would take responsibility for her care. The elder Theophilus agreed, with the condition that she not enter the family home nor speak to their underage children, or she would be sent away again. He was still in control. Elizabeth petitioned to speak with the hospital trustees, which Dr. McFarland allowed. She had no attorney present, and all of the trustees were Calvinists. So it was bold when her first argument was that Christian and Calvinist beliefs were opposites, and she was teaching her children about the true nature of God, while Theophilus was actually preaching against God. Her second argument landed a bit better. She accused her husband of a foul conspiracy against her to take away her liberty and her rights. The trustees agreed, and Elizabeth was released. Elizabeth wasn't able to leave the hospital, however, as she was forced to make an arrangement with the trustees to stay in the hospital for 9 months because Theophilus would just have her committed again, and this left her nowhere else to live. Definitely. He was working with his sister, the superintendent of the asylum, and Dr. McFarland. Elizabeth knew from looking out a crack in the boarded-up window that a man went out to get water from a local pump at the same time every day. She got his attention and slipped him a letter to be delivered to her friend Sarah Hazlitt. Sarah passed the letter on to Judge Charles Starr, who told Sarah to bring him witness evidence of Elizabeth's involuntary home confinement. He issued a writ of habeas corpus ordering Theophilus to bring Elizabeth to his chambers. This was 2 days before he was planning on bringing her back to the hospital. Judge Starr determined it was necessary to schedule a jury trial to decide Elizabeth's sanity. The trial of Packard versus Packard began on January 13, 1864, and lasted 5 days. Theophilus argued that Elizabeth was insane because she disagreed with him on religious and financial matters. There was also a history of insanity within her family, as her mother had also been deemed insane because she got upset when people mentioned the 5 of her children who died when they were young. Insane. Dr. Christopher Knott took the stand and said, despite being calm and rational, Elizabeth could get excited when talking about her religion, so she was insane. Dr. J.W. Brown, the pretend sewing machine salesman, said he knew Elizabeth was hopelessly insane whenever they spoke about religion. It was also surprising to him that she found fault with her husband because he wouldn't discuss religion with her, and he kept denouncing her to the church. She also told Dr. Brown that she didn't like him. She must be insane, am I right? An employee of the Packard family named Sarah Rumsey testified that she had witnessed Elizabeth's insanity one day when Elizabeth asked her husband to clean out a flower bed. When he refused, she changed into a work dress and cleared out the flower bed in the heat of the day. When she was done, she went to her room, took a bath, changed her clothes, and laid down. She was angry and showed ill will toward her husband. A letter from Dr. McFarland was read to the court that said the hospital released Elizabeth because she was too insane and couldn't be cured. The defense had multiple witnesses who testified to Elizabeth's sanity, including 2 neighbors and Sarah Hazlitt, who also testified about the home confinement. Physician and theologian Dr. Duncanson testified that, while he disagreed with her religious beliefs, Elizabeth was absolutely sane. He said, quote, "I do not call people insane because they differ with me." Elizabeth returned home to find another family living in the house. Theophilus rented the house to a new family the night before her release. He sold her furniture and took her money, notes, clothes, and the children and left the state. She attempted to appeal to the Supreme Courts of both Illinois and Massachusetts. Because they were still married, the children and Elizabeth's property were deemed marital assets, and Theophilus had rights to it all. Theophilus would occasionally allow Elizabeth to see her minor children, but only when he was present. She decided to dedicate herself to helping other women. She created the Anti-Insane Asylum Society. They lobbied for public hearings for any citizen accused of insanity and closing the loophole that gave husbands and fathers power to commit women. They also pushed for all current patients the right to a jury trial to test their sanity. Dr. McFarland was big mad about this one. They also lobbied for better rights for married women and to change insanity laws. Elizabeth wrote books and spoke around the country, and eventually she had made enough money to support herself and her children. In 1869, Elizabeth lobbied for legislation to grant husbands and wives equal rights of property and custody of children. When this passed, Theophilus handed the children over without fighting for any partial custody. The reunited family moved to Chicago. An investigation was launched into the hospital where Elizabeth had been held. Dr. McFarland lost his good reputation due to the investigation and died by suicide in 1891. This was happening at the time of the Civil War. Elizabeth was against slavery, but she did hold racist beliefs. She believed that white women suffered more, quote, spiritual agony than a Black person. At the time, it was rare for a Black woman to be diagnosed with hysteria because the term was reserved for dignified white women. Black women were institutionalized more often with the term, quote, violent attached to their diagnoses. Elizabeth died at the age of 81 in 1897. On August 10, 2023, Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker changed the name of the mental health hospital from the Andrew McFarland Mental Health Center to the Elizabeth Packard Mental Health Center. There are so many parallels of Elizabeth's story and Mica's. Reading Mica's list and comparing it to Elizabeth's story shows that powerful men are still using the same abusive tactics to control women to this day. Their stories should also tell us that everyone needs to be vocal, be disruptive, and use your privilege to call out instances of coercive control. Protect each other, be kind to each other, and above all, speak up to make change. Thank you for joining us. If you want to learn more about Mica's story and her case, check us out over on our podcast, Fixate Today, Gone Tomorrow. We'll see you again next time.